battled Republican Congressman George Santos.
George Santos
Now admitting to a list of serial fabrications ranging from his work experience to his education to his religion.
As I always joke, I'm Jew-ish.
Santos has refused to resign despite numerous allegations against him.
If you're going to make up a lie, are you thinking at all? I just think it was a stupid decision in my part. Very stupid decision.
The Republican Congressman George Santos is being described as the biggest liar in U.S. politics, and that's saying something. He lied about his education, his career, and even his ethnicity. And it all paid off. A couple of months ago, New Yorkers elected him to Congress. But since his lies were uncovered, they've turned against him, and now most of his constituents want him to resign. But the shameless congressman is still clinging to office, propped up by party bigwigs like Kevin McCarthy. Why don't they just get rid of him? Well, we'll get into all of that in a moment. But first, here's a quick introduction to the man, the myth, and the mayhem.
Well, this is the first time that Santos admitted that he lied about key details in his resume.
Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did. And I'm sorry.
Am I a lying liar? You betcha.
He's a disgrace, and he needs to step down.
Will you step down?
I will not.
George Santos has only been in the job for a couple of months, and already he's facing calls to resign.
He's a sick puppy. He shouldn't be there.
I've called for his resignation.
He should be sitting in the back row and staying quiet.
The 34-year-old congressman hit back quickly, but the damage was done.
It's not the first time in history that I've been told to shut up and go to the back room, especially by people who come from a privileged background. And it's not going to be the last, and I'm never going to shut up and go to the back of the room. And I think it's reprehensible that the senator would say such a thing to me in the demeaning way he said it. It wasn't very Mormon of him.
Santos appeared a perfect candidate for the Republicans. Wealthy, openly gay, and from a minority background, he defied traditional stereotypes.
Young and I had fun at a festival. Sue me for having a life.
He said he had a Jewish heritage, something that went down well among the voters in New York's 3rd District.
My grandfather fleeing Ukraine, fleeing Stalin's persecution, going to Belgium, finding refuge there, marrying my grandmother, then fleeing Hitler.
He also claimed to have nearly lost his mother in the 9/11 attacks.
My mom was a 9/11 survivor. She was in the South Tower, and she made it out. She got caught up in the ash cloud. My mom fought cancer till her death.
In short, he claimed to be the embodiment of the American dream. Unfortunately, with the emphasis on dream.
This guy's totally fake.
And he is under multiple investigations as we speak.
Not only is he not as wealthy as he claimed, it appears little about his supposed life is true.
Santos is also facing criminal investigations into his campaign finances, a pet charity he ran, and a probe in Brazil over his use of stolen checks.
So the next big scandal is going to be about his personal money and where it came from to loan his campaign.
Santos, can you explain, did you set up a fake GoFundMe account to try to defraud and cheat a veteran out of $3,000?
We had a great organization. We were able to save animals, dogs, cats, horses.
There is no record of this group.
The Securities and Exchange Commission made inquiries into his alleged involvement in a, quote, fraudulent Ponzi scheme.
Were you aware that it was a Ponzi scheme, sir?
It was all fraud.
This is not just a simple liar. This is a con man who does not belong in Congress.
Most people would resign, but not George Santos, even when his own party was urging him to do so.
He's a national joke, he's an international joke, but this joke's gotta go.
Will you step down?
I will not.
Under grilling from Piers Morgan, he finally admitted to lying.
I've been a terrible liar.
You claimed that you graduated with a degree in economics and finance from Baruch College in 2000.
I'll save you I did not attain a college education. That regrettably so is one of my biggest regrets in life.
So that was a lie?
Absolutely.
You're not Jewish.
Well, I never said I was.
You said you were.
And I would always say, but my grandparents are Jewish on my mother's side, so I'm Jew-ish. That was always a joke. I can argue I've done very well in Wall Street.
but not for Goldman's or Citigroup.
Not directly for them.
I mean,
as an
neither
employee.
of them told the New York Times that neither of them had any record of you ever being employed.
I've never worked directly for them. I was never on their books, but I've done work for them through other companies that I work for. Yes, sir.
But Santos is hoping to ride out this wave of revelations. He has a mandate until 2024, and he's pledged to stay there until the voters of his district throw him out. Unfortunately, for those who'd rather see him gone, that appears to be the only way he will leave office.
Mr. Santos?
Well, as I mentioned, most of Santos's constituents want him gone. In a new poll, 66% of all voters say he should resign from Congress. That's up from 59% last month. If you're asking just Democrats, it's 72%, 63% of independents, and even when you're asking just Republicans, it's 58%. 58% of Republican voters in his district want him out. And no wonder he's so unpopular. He's not only been caught lying, he's also being investigated by several state, federal, and congressional bodies. Here's just 3 of the investigations. The Nassau County District Attorney's Office is looking into numerous fabrications and inconsistencies with the congressman's background. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York is trawling through Santos's finances and financial disclosures, and authorities in Brazil have reportedly reopened a criminal investigation into a stolen checkbook that belonged to a man his mother cared for in 2008. Despite all the shame being poured on Mr. Santos, he still has the gall to show up in Congress. Here he is at the State of the Union address being confronted by the veteran Republican Senator Mitt Romney.
John Boy did a sort of attempt at lip reading what went on.
Everyone's kind of figured out what Romney is saying. He comes in on the bottom right. He says, you ought to be embarrassed. You ought to be embarrassed. Ought to be embarrassed. You got to be embarrassed. You got to be.
I didn't expect that he'd be standing there trying to shake hands with every senator and the President of the United States. Given the fact that he's under ethics investigation, he should be sitting in the back row and staying quiet instead of parading in front of the President and people coming into the room.
Well, if this wasn't so serious, it would be funny. Actually, it is still quite funny. Here's a little taste of American satire.
George, why don't you walk us through what happened on the field tonight?
With pleasure. You see, Philadelphia was in trouble until they turned to their secret weapon, George Santos. Just look at the stats. I completed 36 of 25 passes. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave me an Oscar, all at the age of 18. Incredible.
No. I never said I was Jewish. I said I was Jewish. Yeah. No, I did. That's what I said. No, the truth is I'm a part-time Jew. I am. Yes, in my spare time, I'm the Prime Minister of Israel. But I'm not only Jewish, I'm Irish, I'm Scot-ish.
And on that humorous note, let's get started. And our guests today are Jody Radoran, Editor-in-Chief of The Forward, a news media organization that covers issues of interest to American Jews, whose organization uncovered Santos's lies about being of Jewish background. And we have Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas, who makes it clear that Santos is not reflective of the wider Republican Party. And finally, we have someone who knew George Santos a few years ago, Barbara Hurdas, a former colleague from around 2011 to 2012. And she says, well, he was a bit of a fibber even back then. Jody, if I could start with you. What were the nature of George Santos's lies about his Jewish heritage?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So what happened was the New York Times published an investigation in December that showed that George Santos had lied about most of his biography, where he went to college, where he'd worked, a pet charity that he'd founded. And we dug into this basic question. He said that his grandparents had fled anti-Jewish persecution in Europe before World War II. And that's what we found out to be a total fabrication. In fact, his grandparents had been born in Brazil in 1927 and 1918, long before Hitler's rise to power. And he had continued to say that he was Jewish. He talked about himself as a proud American Jew in memos to pro-Israel organizations. He appeared at the Republican Jewish Coalition events and called himself a Latino Jew and a halachic Jew in those events. So we uncovered all of these ways in which he had lied about his heritage and his background.
And he tried to mitigate what he said by saying, I never said I was Jewish, I said I was Jew-ish. What's the distinction there? What does he mean?
I mean, I have no idea what he means, honestly. Obviously, Jewish is an adjective. People do talk about being Jewish as something that is about embracing Jewish identity or Jewish culture without necessarily being kind of biologically Jewish. In at the forward, you know, if you think you're Jewish and you're engaged in Jewish life, it's fine with us. The issue really here isn't whether Santos practices Judaism or believes in Jewish faith. It's really that he lied about his grandparents fleeing the Holocaust. That was sort of depravity that I think also was really the straw that broke the camel's back in the public eye. It's one thing for politicians to lie about their resume, but to make up that kind of history with such a sacred part of our history is really obnoxious.
Now, everything he said was to further his political ambitions and to make him more appealing as a candidate. Why would saying that you're Jewish in that area, remember we have an international audience who don't know the area very well, why would that be of benefit to his candidacy?
I mean, the district is something like 20% Jewish. So there's a lot, and they're very pro-Israel. And so having bona fides there makes some sense. And there were other Jewish candidates in the race, although it's hardly the only way to get elected in that district or anywhere else. I think it's interesting when you say, you know, he lied to advance his political career. Maybe there's something deeper kind of wrong with him here. I mean, it feels the level of the fabrications here is so beyond the pale that it's hard to imagine. And I've been wondering myself, like, he has his own immigration story. He was, you know, born in poverty to an immigrant parent, and, you know, supposedly made good. I don't know why he needs to trade his legitimate story for this fabrication.
That is a very weird thing, and we're going to be speaking to a psychologist a little later in the program. Greg, can I talk about now with you the mechanism to have him removed? We've seen various polls of constituents who want him out by a vast majority. Is there any mechanism to get rid of him?
Unfortunately, no, Matthew. It's more difficult than you would expect, and you'd think a guy that's a complete clown like George Santos and you know, just a pathological liar in so many ways, you know, there's so many reasons to want to be rid of him. And I totally understand the electorate wanting to be rid of him. But unfortunately, you know, we have to be careful. The only mechanism is called expulsion. And, you know, but precedents matter. And I think, you know, the fear is that if you use expulsion too often, or, you know, then you're overriding the wishes of the voters. And it's really reserved for extreme cases. Now, I think everybody on this, you know, this show could agree that this guy, it couldn't be more extreme. But historically, it's only happened 5 times. 3 of those were convicted traitors and congressmen who'd gone to moved to the Confederacy during the Civil War. So that's pretty obvious. And then the 2 others were convicted felons. So I think, unfortunately, the only way to really get rid of him without breaking precedent would be to have him convicted of a felony, which there is a possibility of that with some of his financial scams.
Can I talk about the local area? Because he really shouldn't have made it through the safeguards, but apparently the safeguards don't really exist. Let's start with the opponent. Okay, he is supposed to, or rather their team, is supposed to have done their due diligence on their, on George Santos and have rooted him out by now.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of mistakes made, and if you look at, you know, this is a bit like inside baseball, but it just so happens that the Nassau County Republican Party is very well entrenched, you know, bordering on corrupt in terms of the way that they run the party in Nassau County. So that, you know, clearly he wasn't vetted, and he was actually basically put in the role of Republican candidate because he made some considerable donations to the party and to some of the candidates beginning, you know, in 2020 as well as 21, leading into the election. So, yeah, I think they were definitely asleep at the wheel. So I don't think the voters really had a good picture or an understanding of who this candidate was. He just sort of slipped in the back door, thanks to the way that the party operates.
And Jody, journalists.
Yeah, this is really a failure or a reflection of the failures in both local journalism, the decline in local journalism in our country, and also the really bad things happening in our political system. This race was not declared by the powers that be as an important race. It was not seen as a toss-up race. It was not a race that either political party put any money or attention into, and it was not a race that the national media focused on, because the powers that be declare X number of races to be the swing races that we all are supposed to pay attention to, and this wasn't one of them. It was supposed to be a safe Democratic seat. And the fact is that local journalism is in crisis in our country. We have half the number of working journalists as we did 15 years ago, and a quarter of the number of local newspapers. And in another era, Newsday, which used to be a powerhouse on Long Island with investigative reporters, would have looked into this guy's background, would have followed up on an initial story that the local weekly paper ran that raised questions about his background. And we would have found this out before his election. Similarly, in an era in which more races were competitive and invested in by the parties, either the Republicans or the Democratic opponents would have dug into his background. There was an 87-page memo of opposition research that nobody followed up on. So it's an indictment not just of one guy who took advantage of our vulnerabilities. It's an indictment of the system that created those vulnerabilities.
Greg, the local Republicans want him out, but the ones in D.C., people like Kevin McCarthy, are supporting him. Why?
Well, I think part of it is what I mentioned, is they don't really have much of an option. They can try their best to talk him into resigning. That's a little bit challenging when you only have a 5-seat majority.
They're doing more than that. They're supporting him, aren't they? I mean, they're propping him up. Why? Is it just because they have a very slim majority in the House?
They would lose the seat in a special election. It's because they care more about their majority than they do about the integrity of who sits in the House. They had millions of options in terms of stripping him of committees, in terms of sanctioning him, obviously expulsion, as Greg mentioned. So it is because they do not believe they would win the seat in a special election. That's why they're standing by.
Barbara, you've known George Santos. You worked with him a few years ago. What were the circumstances?
So we started working together the same day, October 2011. He came in. He basically said that he came from a rich family, but to me that didn't make sense because this was a job for $12 an hour, and you're not going to come bragging about your, how rich you are working a $12 customer service job. He also told us that he was in college at the time and that he graduated. He also did tell us that he was Jewish. Several things. All the things that he told the media, he basically back then was telling us then too.
Did you not trust him inherently? Just you didn't feel that he was trustworthy?
From the very first day, I found him to be a liar, but I didn't, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt because he was very charismatic and he did seem like a nice person. But at the same time, I didn't necessarily trust him that much. So he was not somebody, even though we were the same age group, it's not somebody that I wanted to really hang out after work or anything like that.
Did he strike you as ambitious, and did he reveal any political ambitions?
Not political back then. Not until 2016, when Trump got elected. That's when he really started showing interest in politics.
You say he was charismatic. I think a few people might take issue with that. They find him a little bit of a nerd, frankly. And I mean, are you sure he was charismatic? In what way did that manifest itself?
His personality. He was very charismatic in nature. He, was very friendly, was talkative to everyone. He tried to fit in with everyone. He would, you would go into work, he would hug you. He was very friendly. In a way, I kind of maybe consider maybe it was like a cultural thing, that he was very friendly. So that didn't really strike me as weird back then. But he was very friendly with everyone.
Did you find him persuasive?
Not to me, no.
Okay.
Not to me.
Barbara Hurdas, Greg Swenson, and Jody Redoran, thank you so much for your insight today on The Nexus. Much appreciated. Well, he's not the only one to embellish his resume. According to Standout CV, more than half of Americans have lied on their CVs, and that could mean 42.5 million Americans lied to get a job in 2022. Men are slightly more likely to lie than women, around 60% admitting they did so, compared to around half of all women. 1 in 6 people have used fake job referencing services costing nearly $145 per reference. But few of us have gone so far as the Republican Congressman George Santos. Now, I mention he's Republican, but of course, some famous Democrats have also been caught making stuff up. Our transgressing trio includes Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and Elizabeth Warren. Let's start with Joe Biden, and in the late 1980s, running for the Senate, he was forced to admit he had misstated several facts about his education.
I went to law school on a full academic scholarship, the only one in my class to have a full academic scholarship. I went back to law school and in fact ended up in the top half of my class. I was the outstanding student in the political science department at the end of my year. I graduated with 3 degrees from undergraduate school.
Later, it was revealed that Biden actually came 76th out of 85 students in his class at law school. And he came up with this rather lame excuse. "I exaggerate when I'm angry," he said. Nothing changes. To Hillary Clinton now, and another whopper. While campaigning against Barack Obama for the Democrat nomination in 2008, it was revealed that she had lied about coming under sniper fire during a visit to Bosnia when she was First Lady.
I remember landing under sniper fire.
But we're lucky enough to have the video, which shows that she walked calmly across the tarmac with no problems at all. Our final fiction comes from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who for many years claimed to be a Native American, a claim dismissed and mocked by her opponents.
Who, Pocahontas? She said she was Native American, but she wasn't able to document it. I think she's as Native American as I am, okay?
I am sorry that I extended confusion about tribal citizenship and tribal sovereignty.
Well, what a profession, eh? Let's talk to Christian Hart now. He's a professor of psychology at Texas Woman's University. You know, quite a few politicians have lied, Christian, to get their jobs. But let's start with George Santos. We had a guest on a little earlier who said, why would you replace your perfectly good backstory for one that involves, you know, a Jewish heritage, escaping the Holocaust, when you have a perfectly good backstory of your own?
Well, when people lie, they tend to lie because they think the deception is going to work out better than the truth will. And so, you know, I think people make errors in that assessment. People believe the lie is going to work better, but in reality, oftentimes the truth will work better. So presumably, George Santos believed that his story was an inadequate one, and he might be better served by the one that he used as a replacement.
People have used words like pathological liar. And what does that even mean?
Pathological lying is really nothing more than excessive lying that causes problems in people's lives. When we look at pathological lying, oftentimes it's part of a personality disorder, like antisocial personality disorder. And these people do tend to lie without remorse. They manipulate others and use others as sort of pawns in their game. And when confronted, yes, you're right, they do oftentimes seem to express very little remorse for their deception.
His constituents say if he's prepared to lie during the campaign, he's prepared to lie during his term in office. Is that fair?
What we find in our research is that people who are prodigious liars tend to do so across different domains and tend to do so fairly consistently over time. When people are getting away with lying, certainly, there's a certain reinforcement that happens. Yeah. They are successfully achieving what they want through deception. Therefore, they tend to continue to use deception. Yeah. But it very well could be the case that once he's been confronted again and again over his lying, essentially getting caught and at least socially punished for his deception, you might see it taper off. But
we just had a report. We've just had a report about other politicians who have embellished their resumes, to put it mildly. Is there something unique about politics? Do we see a greater rate of lying in politics by politicians than other professions?
Well, what we find is the people who go into politics are no more or less honest than the typical individual. But politics is a profession in which being completely honest can be problematic. Much like in sales, if you're trying to sell an inferior product, being honest would be a problem. And so what we see is that to satisfy the greatest number of voters, people have to hedge, people have to exaggerate, people have to minimize. Essentially, people have to be deceptive. And what we find is, at least in Western European countries, the politicians that are more willing to bend the truth are also more likely to be reelected.
I don't know if this is in your remit, your expertise, but for typical voters out there, they want to pick between 2, 3 candidates, whatever it might be. Are there any ways of picking a liar early on?
Well, as far as identifying liars, it's a very difficult thing to do by simply looking at body cues, the way that people look askance when they're talking, and other tells that you might detect in someone's speech. The primary way that we detect lying is by verifying facts. So people make claims, as in the case of George Santos, people check those claims and find out that there's been some sort of fraud or deception.
Just finally, in all your years of being a psychologist, have you ever seen a case like this in politics, in national politics before?
Not at the national level, no, I have not.
Christian, I'm afraid we've run out of time. That's normally what therapist says, isn't it? Anyway, thank you so much for your advice today on The Nexus. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT. Until next week then, goodbye.